Clearly this morning we're talking about prayer and meditation, not just talking about it, but having an opportunity to experience it. And I suppose the way for me to begin is with a confession to say that I'm not very good at all at this meditation thing, and I would consider myself at best average when it comes to prayer. Now, I know a lot about prayer. I know all the things that are supposed to be a part of prayer. I've heard all the formulas, and I've tried all of them, frankly. And sometimes it feels as though I'm just talking to myself. Sometimes they feel empty and meaningless, and, most of the time I kind of get nothing back. Having said that, I do have to acknowledge that there have been times that when I've been praying that it's been a really powerful, significant experience for me. There's been maybe a sense of relief that's come or a sense of peace that's come over me. And sometimes that's happened as well when others have been praying for me or I've been praying for others. And, I've been fortunate over my life to have the opportunity to travel to a lot of different places and to experience prayer in a lot of different settings. And I've always been impressed and touched by the fervent nature of those who pray and how devout people are in their prayer. I was thinking back to our first trip to the Holy Land. This was back in 1986. And a colleague and I had started a breakfast study group over at St. Luke's, and it was a group of women, and we decided we wanted to go on a field trip. And so the Holy Land was our destination. And I was thinking about the first time we entered the city of Jerusalem. We went in through a gate that was close to, I think, the Church of St. Anne. And when we got inside the church, our guide said to us that someone might want to sing the Lord's Prayer, or we might want to all sing the Lord's Prayer. So he said that because there was a big dome at the very top of the building. And so someone started singing and others chimed in. And there were some Asians in our group who sang in their native language. And it was pretty incredible to hear how the sound just reverberated throughout that building. And when we finished singing, we sat and listened to the sound still up there in that dome. And as they began to fade away, we sat in a moment or two of silence, and then another sound came from outside our walls. And it was a sound with which we had become a bit more familiar. It was the Muslim call to prayer that calls faithful Muslims to kneel in prayer 5 times a day. Well, that was a pretty powerful thing. Those two sounds weren't clashing with one another. They were really in harmony with one another. And then the very next day, we went to what's called the Wailing Wall, the western wall of the temple, the holiest site in Judaism. And I looked at that ancient wall and thought about all that it had seen and heard in its lifetime, the shouts of joy and the cries of despair. And as I made my way toward the wall, carrying my little piece of paper with my prayer in my hand, I remembered the awe I felt at the whole thing, at being in that place. And when I got to the wall, just touching those ancient stones, and then taking my little piece of paper and cramming it into a crevice in that wall, that my prayers would be there with all of the others that were gathered there. And that, too, was a really powerful experience. Well, all those thoughts came to mind as I began thinking about this message for today and working on it. And one of the things I realized is that I'm not in the same place when it comes to prayer as I was back in 1986. And I probably understand less what prayer really is, but yet I feel that my own personal prayer life is probably as strong as it's ever been. It's a positive kind of experience for me. And I think back to my own spiritual journey, and as I said, I knew the formulas. I knew that we were supposed to have things like petition and praise and confession and all that as a part of prayer, and I tried all those kinds of things. But somehow I had in my mind that prayer was supposed to be about connection and relationship, and somehow that wasn't really totally working for me. Well, in the midst of all this kind of turmoil about how vital prayer was and how it really worked, I began to feel some nudges that maybe I should go to seminary. Now, I thought, I guess, that maybe I would learn more about prayer and be better at praying if I went to seminary. And so I sort of tiptoed my way in, and I began to have a lot of new understandings and revelations, and some of them were about prayer. And well, let me share one experience with you that I had. And I'm not totally sure what it says about prayer, but my first semester, I was taking, one of the classes I took was Introduction to Old Testament. I had had no background, none, in terms of Old Testament. And I felt lost for the first couple of months in that class. In fact, I even went to talk to the professor and explained what I was experiencing. And I don't remember exactly what he said, although he did encourage me to kind of hang in there. Well, before we knew it, we got to that dreaded midterm exam time. And I studied and studied and studied to prepare for this. And I remember taking that exam and not having a clue how I'd done. Have you ever had a test like that where you take it and you don't know whether you've done well or whether you flunked it? I mean, it was just an incredible experience. Well, this particular professor had a tradition, I guess, that when he finished grading those blue books, remember the blue books? When he finished grading those things, he would line them up alphabetically outside the door of the classroom. And then the entire class period, you left him out there, you didn't get him till after class, the entire class period was his thinking about what he hoped that we had gained or experienced or explored or learned as a result of our time together. And then class was over and we could pick up our blue books. Well, I grabbed mine and ran out to my car in the parking lot. There was no way I was going to open it inside the seminary. And I remember sitting there and I said to God, God, if this is a D or an F, I know what you're telling me. And finally I got up my courage and I opened the book. Well, it was not a D or an F. It was a pretty good grade. And I remember saying out loud, now what am I supposed to do with this? Well, you can figure out kind of what I did with it. I kind of stuck it out and stayed there. And as I said, I don't know what that really says about prayer, except that somehow I felt that it was a bit of an affirmation or a confirmation or whatever you want to call it. Now, not long after that, I was asked as a part of the clergy team to share in the pastoral prayer rotation at St. Luke's, and that scared me to death. I couldn't imagine how I could say all the proper things and have this beautiful flowery language and say it all the right way. And I shared my concerns, and a colleague really gave me some advice that I found really helpful. He said, just pray like you're talking to a friend, and let the congregation listen in over your shoulder. And I thought, what? No specific language, no certain parts I had to include, just ordinary common language like talking to a friend? Well, that changed a lot for me in terms of my understanding, and it really helped me understand that prayer really was about relationship. And just as we have communication and connection with those who are the people that we love most in our life, we have to have that same kind of thing when it comes to that relationship with God. And it's about nurturing that and keeping that. And that helped and has continued to help me. But I still have questions about prayer. And I wonder sometimes about prayers for healing, because sometimes I think we don't get the answer we're expecting because we have this certain understanding about what healing is supposed to be. And yet, I think in those situations, praying helps because it offers comfort. It offers comfort and a sense of peace maybe to those who are grieving. And so it still is a powerful thing. I think it really isn't so much about the words we say, but how our heart is, if they're really sincere and heartfelt prayers. That's what Mahatma Gandhi said. He said, in prayer, it's better to have a heart without words than words without a heart. So what I've learned is that the words don't really matter at all. It has to do with the sincerity of our heart that makes the difference. Sometimes I suspect we wonder, as you've seen in some of the clips this morning, why we pray. Why would we do that? And I think there are several reasons that it's good to pray. For one, it slows us down and it helps us pause and reflect and maybe gather our thoughts. And we have to remember that part of praying is listening as well and maybe finding some clarity that we hadn't had before. And I think the reality is prayer has a way of changing us. That's what the theologian Soren Kierkegaard said. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. Well, I really like that because I think prayer changes us. Maybe changes our perspective, changes our attitude, or gives us what we need to keep moving forward. Well, you probably won't be surprised to hear me say that my prayer life has taken another change and evolved, particularly over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and that's because of my exposure to, learning of, experiencing Celtic spirituality. Now, I'm not going to belabor it because we've talked a lot about it over the past years, but suffice it to say that now that I understand and see that the sacred, the holy, the divine is in every part of life, it's in every person we encounter, it's in us, it's in me, it's in you. And when we meet one another, we are experiencing the sacred, the holy. It's in every part of creation, it's in every experience we have. It's in all of life, all that exists. And it is this constant living, loving dialogue with the sacred, with the holy, with the divine. You see, it really is everything we do. It's everything we think, every idea that comes into our mind, every creative thought that comes to us, every time we think of a person. And it has to do with when we breathe, breathing in and breathing out. At least that's what it was for Thomas Merton, who said, "How I pray is breathe." And I like that. I can relate to that. You see, the reality is we can pray and be in prayer anytime, anywhere. It can be in the quiet of a quiet place, a room to ourselves. It can be in the hustle and bustle of a city. It can be in just noticing the awe and being aware of the magnificence of spring coming alive. It can be in those precious moments we spend with a friend. I think one of the most powerful ways that we're in prayer is by allowing ourselves to be in nature. I like the part from Anne of Green Gables that talks about that. It says this: "Why must people kneel down to pray? If I really wanted to pray, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd go out into a great big field all alone or in the deep, deep woods, and I'd look up into the sky, up, 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 into that lovely blue sky that looks as if there was no end to its blueness. And then I just feel a prayer." I guess that's the sense I want to convey today, the immediacy of prayer, that it's with us and around us and within us all the time. As I've said before, this topic is one of those that Tom Stella discusses in his book, Finding God Beyond Religion. And this is what he says: "And because we are in a state of constant communion with God, both within and outside ourselves, prayer can be considered more than an activity consisting of words or thoughts directed to God. Instead, our entire lives can be a prayer, a liturgy celebrating the presence of God incarnate in every breath we take, every word we utter, and every movement we make." To that, all I can say is, Amen.